Welcome to this exploration of one of the most unsettling instances in Ozark mountain history. Please let me know where you're watching from and what time you're listening to this narration in the comments section before we start. What locations and times of day or night these recorded stories reach are of interest to us. In the fall of 1895, when the Ozark Mountains were still mostly wild, a community called Hollow Creek vanished out of thin air. Only half-cooked dinners and chilly hearths remained after the Eldridge clan, a total of 17 souls, disappeared without a trace. There were never any bodies discovered. They never dug graves. No explanation was ever verified. One of the most puzzling mysteries in the history of the American frontier is the disappearance of the lost Hollow clan. You are going to hear the results of 7 decades' worth of government investigations, first-hand recollections, and historical documents. The cited documents were kept in the Missouri Historical Society's archives until 1964, when they were moved to microfilm and then lost during a building renovation. From newspaper clippings, journal notes, and the recorded accounts of individuals who ventured to explore the hush that descended upon Hollow Creek, the following story has been pieced together. The community was located in what is now Newton County, Arkansas, in a small valley between Mount Judea and Compton. The only way to get there was via a perilous mountain trail that became impassable in the winter. The disappearance may have gone unnoticed for almost 3 weeks because of the seclusion. The trail was frigid by that point, both literally and figuratively. In his official report, Sheriff Thomas Layton of Harrison wrote, published on December 3, 1895, "Upon arrival at the location known as Hollow Creek, we found the settlement to be entirely deserted. Livestock was absent from the pens, though feed remained in the troughs. The home showed no signs of struggle or hasty departure. Personal effects, including clothing and family heirlooms, remained in place. The community hearth contained cold ashes, estimated to be 3 weeks old. No human remains were located despite an extensive search of the surrounding area. What happened to the Eldridge clan and their associates? Why would an entire settlement abandon their homes without taking their possessions? And why has every subsequent investigation into the matter ended in dead ends or, in some cases, tragedy? The beginning, not the end, is where the story of Hollow Creek starts. We must first comprehend the identity of the Eldridges and the reasons behind their extreme seclusion in order to comprehend what transpired during those fateful days in October 1895. Born in 1842 in eastern Tennessee, Jeremiah Eldridge was the 3rd son of a tobacco planter who had moderate success. According to Greene County, Tennessee, county records, the family maintained a modest but fruitful 80-acre farm. Before his father decided that Jeremiah's academic preparation was complete at the age of 14, he acquired a basic education at the nearby parish school. Young Jeremiah showed an early interest in geology and local cave formations, frequently vanishing for hours to investigate the limestone hollows close to his family home, according to family letters saved by distant cousins. Like many young men from Tennessee, Jeremiah joined the Confederate Army when the Civil War broke out. According to military archives, he served under General Nathan Bedford Forrest and took part in a number of important battles, such as the Battle of Shiloh. According to his service record, he was briefly held after the war, but was freed after the general amnesty. The most noteworthy aspect of Jeremiah's military service is the lapse in his recorded whereabouts between June 1863 and February 1864. He was given particular, confidential responsibilities, the specifics of which were never documented in official documents, according to a letter from his commanding officer. Later, this time frame would be important to investigators looking into the Hollow Creek mystery. When Jeremiah returned to Tennessee after the war, he discovered his parents dead and his family farm destroyed by the riotous violence that defined the fighting there. Both of his brothers had lost their lives in war, in Nashville and Gettysburg, respectively. Jeremiah, alone and destitute, spent years working as a trapper and laborer until making a name for himself as a fur dealer with some degree of success. In 1868, according to county records, he wed Rebecca Hollister, a teacher from a nearby county whose family had also lost members in the conflict. Jay is a changed man from the boy I knew before the war. There's a quietness to him now, a watchfulness. Rebecca's diary, which was found in the abandoned settlement years later, details their early relationship. When he speaks of his time in service, he tells the same stories that all the veterans tell. But sometimes at night I hear him talking in his sleep about what they found and the voices from below. When I ask him come morning, he claims no memory of such dreams. Beginning with a 120-acre plot in what would become Newton County, Arkansas, Jeremiah started buying land in the isolated Ozarks by 1870. It is unclear what attracted Jeremiah to this specific valley, but the land deed, which is still in the county records, describes the property as mountainous terrain with limited agricultural potential, including a notable circular depression of limestone formation approximately 1/2 mile east of the proposed homestead site. Even by frontier standards, the area was extremely remote, the land was not very fertile, and the closest town of any size was almost 20 miles distant over challenging terrain. She was initially hesitant to relocate to such a remote area, according to Rebecca's diary entries from this time period. Jay insists this place has been waiting for us. When I express concern about the children growing up so far from society and schooling, he tells me some knowledge is better gained away from the influences of the changing world. The Eldridges first lived in a makeshift shelter while building their permanent cabin after arriving at what would eventually become Hollow Creek in September 1870. Rebecca's diary recounts those initial days. The valley is beautiful in its way, though the silence here has a weight I've never experienced. The nearest neighbor is half a day's ride. Jay spends much of his time exploring the hollow east of our camp. He returns with strange rocks and sketches I cannot make sense of. He says little about what he does there, but he seems more at peace than I've seen him since before the war. 3 cabins had been added to the settlement by 1875. By that time, Jeremiah and Rebecca had 4 children: Ezekiel, born in 1875, Samuel, born in 1876-1873, Martha, born in 1871, and Isaac, born in 1869. They were joined in 1872 by Rebecca's sister Catherine and her husband William, who constructed a cabin about 50 yards from the main house. In 1874, William's brother Thomas and his spouse Eleanor arrived. A letter written by William to his Tennessee parents in June 1873 offers a bit of information about the early settlement. The valley provides adequately, though not abundantly. Game is plentiful, and we have established modest crops of corn and beans. Jeremiah knows these mountains better than men who have lived here their entire lives, though he had never set foot in the Ozarks before our arrival. He has a peculiar way about him, keeping detailed maps and spending days at a time in the hollow he claims to be studying for its unusual rock formations. The children are forbidden from playing there, which suits us fine as the place has an unwelcoming atmosphere. 5 cottages, positioned in a semicircle around a central clearing, were part of the village by 1895. Jeremiah and Rebecca owned the main house, and by that time had 4 grown children, 3 of whom had married and had children of their own. Isaac had married Sarah Collins, a Harrison native whom he had met on one of the few supply runs to the town. Ruth, who is 2 years old, and Joseph, who is 4, are their 2 children. After meeting Jeremiah while traveling to Springfield for supplies in 1888, Richard Thornton, who Martha had married, had moved to the community with his parents. Elizabeth, their only child, was 7 years old. The elder Thorntons, Albert and Constance, who arrived in the settlement in 1888 with their 3 children, Richard, who later married Martha, Eldridge, Victoria, and Benjamin, occupied the 5th cabin. Samuel remained single, and Ezekiel, the youngest at 20, was described in Rebecca's journal as troubled in mind. During the first investigation, a detailed household notebook written by Rebecca Eldridge was found undamaged. The most thorough account of day-to-day activities at Hollow Creek can be found in her entries. The community grew potatoes, squash, beans, and corn, and was essentially self-sufficient. When the mountain road to Harrison became impassable in the winter, they hunted deer and small game, bred hogs and poultry, and stored food for the hard season. According to Rebecca's journal entries, the community had developed a routine that had not changed much over time. Jeremiah led the group in Bible readings and hymns on Sundays, which were a day of religious observance and relaxation. No preacher ever came to the isolated community, and the closest church was too far away to attend on a regular basis. The isolation was almost total and seemed to be intentional. Her final entry, dated October 12, 1895, reads, "Frost came early this year. Samuel returned from the hunt with 2 deer which should see us through until spring. Ezekiel, still troubled by the dreams. Martha says the children heard voices from the hollow again last night. Jeremiah insists it's just wind. I'm not so certain. The look in his eyes betrays his words. He knows more than he says. Jay has called for a family council tomorrow after Sunday reading. Says there's a matter that can no longer be delayed. It is noteworthy that this diary entry mentions voices from the hollow, a detail that would be important in subsequent studies. Known locally as Echo Hollow because of its unique acoustic qualities, the hollow in question was a limestone depression about half a mile east of the village. Echo Hollow was described as a nearly perfect circular depression in the limestone bedrock, about 150 feet in diameter and 65 feet deep at its center point, in a surveyor's report from 1872 that the county commissioned to update property records. Citing superstitious beliefs, local guides refused to enter the depression, saying, "The walls descend at a consistent angle of approximately 40 degrees. The acoustic properties are remarkable, with even whispered words carrying clearly from one side to the other." From Rebecca's journal entries in the months before the disappearance, the routine of the colony seemed commonplace. They did the routine tasks of frontier life, such as tending to their crops and getting ready for winter. However, there are subliminal signs of mounting stress throughout her work. References to Ezekiel's night terrors start to occur more frequently in July 1895, and from August onward, there are more and more references to strange noises coming from the direction of Echo Hollow. What had disturbed this peaceful life? A letter from Martha Eldridge to her friend Emma Cartwright in Springfield provides the first significant hint. After Emma passed away in 1932, the letter, which was postmarked September 28, 1895, was discovered among her belongings. In it, Martha wrote, "Dearest Emma, I pray this letter finds you and the children in good health. How I miss our conversations and your level guidance during these troubling times. Father's behavior grows more peculiar by the day. Since returning from his last trip to Harrison, he speaks of little besides the need for vigilance. He has taken to carrying his rifle even to family meals. Mother says it's just his war memories returning, but I see how she locks the cabin door now, even during daylight hours. The children are affected by the tension, though we try to shield them. Little Elizabeth woke crying 3 nights past, claiming she heard someone calling her name from the darkness beyond our window. Richard insists it was just an owl or fox, but the look on Father's face when I mentioned it at breakfast told a different story. Ezekiel's condition worsens. He barely sleeps, and when he does, he wakes screaming about those who wait beneath. Father forbade him from going to the hollow after finding him there at dawn last week, sitting motionless and staring at the center of the depression. Ezekiel claimed he was listening to the instructions. I confess, Emma, that for the first time since we established our home here, I find myself longing for the safety of town walls and the company of neighbors who are not family. Richard suggests we might visit Springfield after the winter, but Father is unlikely to permit it. He speaks increasingly of the corruption of towns and the need for our isolation. I must conclude this letter, as Richard is waiting to take it to Harrison on the supply run. I will write again when I can. Your devoted friend, Martha. When Jeremiah Eldridge visited Harrison in the middle of September 1895, what transpired? According to town records, he came on September 14th to sell furs and buy provisions. Investigators were later informed by Harold McCreary, the general store owner, that Eldridge appeared unusually agitated and bought more ammunition than usual. Additionally, McCreary claimed that Eldridge got into a heated argument with a well-dressed man who was unfamiliar to the locals in the establishment. According to McCreary's statement preserved in Sheriff Layton's files, Mr. Eldridge came in around midday, as was his custom twice yearly. He conducted his usual business, trading furs for coffee, salt, ammunition, and other supplies they didn't produce in their settlement. I noticed he requested twice the usual amount of rifle cartridges, which I commented upon. He replied something about better to have and not need. He seemed distracted, checking the door whenever someone entered. Near the end of his transaction, a gentleman entered whom I'd never seen before. Well-dressed, city clothes, not local. This man took particular interest when he heard me address Mr. Eldridge by name. He approached and inquired whether Mr. Eldridge was from the settlement at Hollow Creek. When Eldridge confirmed this, the stranger asked specific questions about the limestone depression on his property. The conversation grew heated, though they kept their voices low. I couldn't hear most of it, but I distinctly heard the stranger say something like, "The survey was quite clear about what was found." And Eldridge responded, "Nothing was found because nothing was there to find." The stranger then said something about, "The department still has an interest," which seemed to greatly disturb Eldridge. He left shortly after, earlier than his usual pattern of staying for a meal at the hotel. The identity of this visitor is still unclear. Some conjectured that he was either a federal agent looking into the dubious pasts of Civil War veterans, or a Pinkerton detective. Some speculated that he might have been a land investor who was drawn to the valley where the Eldridges had made their home. Years later, scholar James Thornton put out a more unconventional theory. The man might have been a mining interest or geological surveyor. The limited data suggests that the settlement's behavior changed once he returned to Hollow Creek. Jay called the men together today. They spoke in low voices by the edge of the clearing for nearly 2 hours. When Richard returned, he would tell me nothing of what was discussed, only that Father has concerns about strangers possibly coming to the valley before winter sets in. We are to keep the children close to the cabins at all times. The hollow is now forbidden to all. Rebecca's journal records, increased hunting expeditions, the preservation of additional food stores, and the repair of cabin walls and roofs, all common winter preparations, but carried out with what she called uncommon urgency. Then, on October 12, 1895, Rebecca made her last diary entry, citing the family council that was scheduled for the next day. The historical record is silent until November 2nd, when Jacob Turner, a Jasper trapper, discovered the deserted community while looking for cover from an early snowstorm. Turner's story, which was provided to Sheriff Layton and is documented in the county files, depicts a scene that is both commonplace and incredibly disturbing. I'd been working my trap lines when the storm blew in earlier than expected. Knowing the Eldridge place was nearby, I made for it, hoping for shelter till the weather broke. I approached just before dusk. First thing I noticed was the absence of smoke from the chimneys, which struck me as odd given the bitter cold. I called out but received no answer. The cabin stood open to the elements, which no frontier family would permit, especially with winter coming on. Inside the main house, I found a table set for the evening meal, with food partially prepared but abandoned. A pot of stew had boiled dry on the hearth. In one corner, a child's doll sat propped against a rocking chair, as if waiting for its owner's return. A Bible lay open on a side table, a pair of reading spectacles folded neatly upon it. I checked each cabin in turn, finding similar scenes of ordinary life suddenly interrupted. In one, a half-mended shirt lay with needles still stuck in the fabric. In another, a checkers game appeared to have been abandoned mid-play. The root cellar was well stocked with preserved food. The barns contained hay and feed, though no livestock remained except for a few chickens. According to Turner, there was no blood, no violence, and no hint of struggle or conflict. Most of the settlers' belongings were still there, including valuable artifacts like Rebecca's silver hairbrush and Jeremiah's pocket watch, which was discovered on the mantel, but their few horses were gone. Sheriff Layton and his deputy's initial investigation yielded few answers regarding the disappearance of the village. They found no remains in the nearby forests or tombs close to the settlement. The most unsettling aspect was that there was no trail at all. Investigators were both literally and figuratively chilled, because any prints that might have existed had been covered by the recent snowfall. Sheriff Layton's official report contains this observation. The absence of any sign of violence or struggle suggests the settlers left voluntarily. Yet the abandonment of valuable possessions and winter supplies defies logical explanation. No frontier family would leave food, tools, and shelter behind with winter approaching, unless under extreme duress. Yet we found no evidence of what might have caused such a hasty departure. We conducted a thorough search of the surrounding area to a radius of approximately 3 miles, focusing particular attention on the limestone depression described in prior surveys. This geological feature, while unusual, revealed nothing of note beyond a single set of footprints, partially filled with snow, leading to its center and then returning to the settlement. The age of these tracks could not be determined with certainty. It is the determination of this office that the Eldridge settlement has relocated for reasons unknown. Given the absence of any evidence of criminal activity and the challenging conditions of the approaching winter, this investigation is suspended pending new information. The mystery was covered with lurid curiosity in local media. The headline, "Entire Settlement Vanishes Without a Trace," appeared in the Harrison Daily Times on November 10, 1895. Despite decades of harmonious interactions with local indigenous peoples, the article conjectured that the settlers may have escaped Indian danger. The following is a particularly interesting quote from an elderly Cherokee man who lived close to Jasper and was quoted in a follow-up article on November 17th. "That hollow has been known to our people for many generations. We call it the place where the earth listens. Our hunters avoided it. Those who camped nearby reported dreams of voices calling them to dig deeper into the ground. Your white settlers were not the first to disappear from that valley. They will not be the last." Despite the area's suitability for habitation, archaeological surveys carried out in the 1950s revealed evidence of several centuries-old indigenous settlements, but they also noticed an odd lack of artifacts within a few miles of Echo Hollow. The investigation came to a standstill when winter set down over the Ozarks. Despite repeated efforts in the spring, no new proof surfaced. The abandoned community was a silent reminder of an inexplicable catastrophe. The land and belongings were eventually put up for auction by the county in 1897. Hollow Creek started to gradually disappear from the public consciousness as the cottages were demolished for lumber, but local folklore remained. A surveyor's assistant was reported to have gone missing briefly in 1908 while working in the area, only to be discovered wandering disoriented 2 days later, with no memory of where he had been. Hunters and trappers avoided the area, saying it felt unwelcoming, or that they experienced unusual dreams when camping nearby. If it weren't for Walter Eldridge, Jeremiah's distant cousin who discovered the disappearance in 1923, the narrative could have ended there, consigned to local folklore. Walter, an American history professor at Washington University in St. Louis, developed a fascination for this extinct lineage. He was able to address the riddle with a rigorous rigor that had been lacking from the initial investigation because of his academic skills and resources. Walter started his investigation by looking through newspaper articles and county records, but his biggest find was tracking down Emma Cartwright, who received Martha Eldridge's last letter. Even though she was old by 1923, Emma could clearly remember Martha's letters. She presented Walter with a number of previous correspondences that had not been included in the formal inquiry. In a July 1895 letter, Martha wrote, "Ezekiel's condition worsens. The night terrors leave him exhausted, and during waking hours he speaks of little besides what he calls the watchers in the hollow. Father forbids discussion of it at meals, but Mother worries. The Thornton boy now reports similar dreams. He woke the household 3 nights past screaming about the voices from below. Most disturbing is that he and Ezekiel describe identical visions, though they have not discussed them with each other." Rebecca's notebook referenced a limestone depression called Echo Hollow, which piqued Walter's attention. In his own diary, which was subsequently discovered among his effects following his disappearance in 1924, Walter wrote, "Local guides refuse to take me to the hollow. They cite dangerous terrain, but their eyes betray deeper fears. One old-timer in Jasper told me that even before the Eldridges settled there, the place had a reputation. The Cherokee apparently avoided it, calling it the place where the ground listens. A similar reluctance exists among the current population. When I inquired at the general store about hiring a guide, conversation stopped and I was firmly but politely discouraged." In April 1924, Walter finally located Echo Hollow in spite of the warnings. His diary describes it as a perfectly circular depression, about 50 yards across and 20 feet deep. The limestone walls create strange acoustic effects. Whispers from one side can be clearly heard on the other. At the center stands a single dead oak tree, its branches twisted into shapes that seem almost deliberate. The silence here is oppressive, as if the air itself is holding its breath. Each of Walter's 3 trips to Echo Hollow is recorded in his journal. On his second visit, he reported discovering something stuck in the dead oak's trunk, a metal piece that he managed to pry out and recognized as A button from a Confederate uniform. This seemed to be a noteworthy discovery, considering Jeremiah Eldridge's military experience. Walter's final diary entry from May 17, 1924, states that he intended to excavate around the base of the tree on his 3rd visit, after noticing disturbed dirt. His journal entry reads in full, "Returned to the hollow today." The weather is clear, though unusually cold for May. I've brought digging tools to investigate the area around the oak tree. The soil there appears to have been disturbed in the past, though not recently. The vegetation pattern is unnatural. A circular area approximately 6 feet in diameter where nothing grows. The silence remains the hollow's most unnerving feature. Even on this spring day with birds calling from the forest all around, once I descend into the depression, all external sound seems muted, as if heard through thick glass. Yet sounds generated within the hollow are unusually clear and seem to linger. I've set up camp at the hollow's rim rather than returning to Jasper. I want to observe the acoustic properties at night to determine whether there might be a scientific explanation for the voices mentioned in Martha's letters. Midday now, I've begun excavation around the base of the oak. The soil is loose and appears to have been previously dug up and replaced. Approximately 8 inches down, I've encountered a layer of flat stones arranged in what appears to be a deliberate pattern. I'll continue carefully. Afternoon. Beneath the stone layer I found a small metal box, approximately 6 by 4, military issue by the look of it. It's locked, but the lock is rusted. I should be able to open it with my tools back at camp. The sound is back today, not wind, not an echo, something else. This line marks the abrupt conclusion of his journal. Walter's rented room in Jasper was discovered empty 3 days later, but his possessions were still there. They found his journal open to that last entry on the nightstand. There was no indication of Walter or the metal box he mentioned, but his camping gear and excavation tools were still at the hollow. After a quick search, local officials were unable to locate Walter. Walter's evolving theory regarding the Hollow Creek disappearance is revealed by the contents of his study notes, which have been kept in university archives. His belief was that Jeremiah Eldridge had chosen that particular valley for settlement because he had known about Echo Hollow beforehand, perhaps from his special duties during the Civil War. In military archives, Walter had found an intriguing mention of a special detachment under Colonel Hargrove in 1863, with a Corporal J. Eldridge as one of its members. The unit was sent to Tennessee to look into claims of strange geological formations that could provide crucial materials for the Confederate war effort. During the last days of the war, the reports from this trip were either lost or purposefully destroyed. According to Walter's notes, is it possible that whatever Eldridge encountered during that expedition led him to seek out similar formations after the war? The timing of his land purchase in the Ozarks corresponds to a geological survey of the region published in 1869, which makes brief mention of unusual circular depressions in the limestone bedrock of northern Arkansas. When Dr. Margaret Winters, a folklorist from the University of Arkansas, started gathering oral histories of the Ozarks in 1952, the riddle was once again put on hold. The Hollow Creek disappearance, which by that time had become a local legend, was mentioned in a number of her interviews. Thomas McCreary, the elderly son of the general store owner who had known Jeremiah Eldridge prior to his abduction, provided one account. According to Thomas, who was a youngster in 1895, his father had disclosed further information that was never included in official records. According to Thomas's recorded testimony, Pa didn't tell the sheriff everything. Said some things were better left unsaid in official statements. But he told me years later, when I was grown, about what really happened with Eldridge and that stranger. The man wasn't just passing through. He'd been asking about Eldridge for days before they met at the store. Asked specific questions about the hollow on Eldridge's property. Wanted to know if anyone had reported unusual sounds or experiences near it. According to Pa, after Eldridge left, the man lingered at the store. He showed Pa papers identifying himself as a representative of the Department of the Interior, Geological Survey Division. Said they had an interest in certain limestone formations in the Ozarks, particularly those with unusual acoustic properties. The man asked if Eldridge ever mentioned finding anything in the hollow. Artifacts, unusual rocks, openings in the limestone. Pa said no, but he got the impression the man didn't believe him. Before leaving, the stranger said to Pa, "That man and his kin are sitting on something they don't understand. It won't end well." About a week after Eldridge's disappearance was reported, that same stranger returned to Harrison. He joined the sheriff's follow-up search party. Pa found that mighty suspicious, but when he mentioned it to Sheriff Layton, he was told to keep such thoughts to himself. The stranger was never mentioned in any official reports of the investigation. Jacob Turner's daughter, Esther Turner, who found the abandoned town, was also questioned by Dr. Winters. According to Esther, her father had not been completely honest with the authorities. Her statement was recorded. "Pa told us he found something in the hollow that he didn't report," she stated. "A circle of stones that hadn't been there when he trapped that area before. And inside the circle, the ground had been disturbed, as if something had been buried and then dug up. He also told us, though he'd never admit this to any official, that he spent 2 nights at the settlement, not just one as he claimed. On the second night, he said he heard what sounded like voices coming from the direction of the hollow. Not normal voices, he said, but something that spoke directly into his mind. He packed up and left at first light and never returned to that valley again. For years after, he'd wake up in the night, claiming he could still hear those voices calling him back." In the summer of 1953, Dr. Winters traveled to Echo Hollow herself as a result of these fresh reports. She brought equipment and Raymond Carter, a graduate student, to take pictures of the location. Their journey produced a number of important discoveries. They started by finding the dead oak tree that Walter Eldridge had written about in his notebook, but it had fallen and was largely rotted by 1953. They found a little metal box around its previous base that contained what looked like journal pages written in a cramped, tight style. The water damage made most of the text illegible, but certain phrases could be deciphered, including repeated references to those who watch from below and the voices that are not voices. Dr. Winters' field notes include this transcription of the fragments that remained legible. Arrived at the hollow as instructed. The formation matches the description from the Tennessee expedition. The acoustic properties are identical. Colonel H. believes these formations are not natural, but constructed for a specific voices become clearer at night. They speak of things buried deep, of knowledge from before. The same promises made at the Tennessee site. Colonel H. insists we must. The excavation reached 30 feet below the surface today. The limestone gives way to a different material, unlike any rock formation documented in geological literature. It absorbs sound completely, creating a sensation of pressure on the eardrums. When 3 men refused to continue the excavation after the dreams began. Colonel H. arrested for desertion, though we are not technically a military operation anymore. The War Department officially disbanded our unit, but the colonel insists our work is vital to the Confederacy's found the opening today. It extends downward at a sharp angle. The air emerging from it is cold and carries a faint odor of metal and something organic yet unfamiliar. Colonel H. plans to descend tomorrow with survivors regrouped at Rendezvous Point. Only 5 of us remain. Colonel H. is not among them. The expedition is officially terminated. We sealed the entrance as best we could and disguised the excavation site. Agreed that the location must never be. Dreams persist despite distance from the site. The voices know my name now. They speak of future sites where their kind can be found. One is in the Ozark Range. I will investigate when the war ends to ensure it remains sealed. Some things must stay buried. The handwriting appeared to be pieces of a journal that Jeremiah Eldridge kept during or after his service in the Civil War, as it matched examples of his script found in county archives. If genuine, they suggest that Jeremiah had previously encountered geological features resembling Echo Hollow, perhaps while he was absent from regular military service in 1863 to 1864 for an unknown reason. More importantly, Dr. Winters and Carter discovered signs of excavation around the eastern rim of the hollow. This was not new labor, but rather work that had been done decades ago and had since been overgrown. Their images appear to be the remains of a shaft that was excavated into the limestone. It is around 6 feet in diameter and unknown in depth. In her field notes, Dr. Winters wrote, "The hollow itself presents several geological anomalies that warrant further investigation. The limestone formation does not match typical Ozark karst structures." Carter noted that the circular depression appears almost too perfect to be natural. The acoustic properties are indeed remarkable. A whisper from one side carries perfectly to the other, while sounds from outside the hollow seem muffled once you descend into it. Most disturbing is the sensation both Carter and I experienced independently while within the depression. A subtle but persistent sense of being watched, despite the obvious absence of anyone else in the vicinity. This subjective experience aligns with descriptions in both Walter Eldridge's journal and the fragments we discovered. The excavation site on the eastern rim appears to have been deliberately filled in and disguised at some point in the past. The vegetation pattern suggests this occurred decades ago, possibly around the time of the Eldridge disappearance. Clearing away the surface growth revealed a shaft lined with timber supports in an advanced state of decay. We were unable to determine its depth, as debris has filled in much of the opening, but the remaining visible portion extends at least 12 feet vertically before angling sharply to the east toward the center. With the support of the university and the appropriate archaeological tools, Dr. Winters organized a follow-up expedition. In her September 1953 presentation to the department, she detailed plans for thorough excavation of the eastern rim site and ground-penetrating radar investigations. The following summer, the idea was accepted. The enigma is further complicated by the fact that Dr. Winters unexpectedly retracted her proposal in December 1953. 6 months after taking a leave of absence, she returned to the university and refused to talk about Hollow Creek or her studies there. Dr. Winters vigorously resisted Carter's attempt to publicize their preliminary findings, threatening to sue him if he did so. Carter, in a private letter to a colleague that surfaced after his death in 1986, wrote, "Margaret returned from her second trip to the Hollow a changed woman. She went back alone in November, against my strong objections, saying she needed to verify certain measurements before Winter made the site inaccessible. She was gone for 3 days. When she returned to Fayetteville, she immediately burned her field notes and photographs. When I pressed her for an explanation, she would only say that some things should remain buried, and that she would not be responsible for what might follow if our findings became public. I asked her directly what she found during her solitary visit. She refused to answer, but her hand shook as she lit a cigarette, and Margaret was not a woman easily shaken. The only detail she would share was that she had found evidence of recent activity at the shaft site, suggesting someone else had been excavating there recently. The most troubling aspect was her insistence that we destroy the journal fragments we'd recovered. When I objected on academic grounds, she became uncharacteristically emotional, saying, "They're still there, Raymond. Whatever happened to the Eldridges, to Walter, it's still there waiting in the dark, and it knows we've been looking for it." 50 years after her death, Dr. Winters asked that her recordings of Hollow Creek interviews be sealed in university archives and never disseminated her Ozark folklore collection. The tapes were eventually released in 2018 after her died in 1968. Sadly, the collection does not include the reel that included the interviews with Thomas McCreary and Esther Turner. When James Thornton, a doctoral student working on his thesis on frontier towns, uncovered county records that had been missed in earlier inquiries, it marked the end of the Lost Hollow clan probe. In 1872, 3 years after Jeremiah Eldridge founded his community, one of these was a land survey. More interestingly, the survey mentioned evidence of prior excavation work of unknown purpose or origin. This suggests that the hollow had been a site of interest even before the Eldridges arrived, raising questions about whether Jeremiah chose that particular valley by chance, or if he was drawn there for specific reasons related to the hollow. The survey also noted an unusual circular depression on the property, and included a surveyor's comment that local indigenous guides refused to enter the area. The journal was not one of the items preserved from the investigation, nor was it ever formally logged into evidence, but Thornton also discovered a partial inventory of items found in the abandoned settlement that included something not previously mentioned. One leather-bound journal, pages removed, cover marked with unknown symbols, found beneath floorboards in main cabin. Sheriff Layton didn't mention it in his reports, which could indicate that he either forgot about it or purposefully left it out. Most notably, Thornton found a death certificate for Harold McCreary, the owner of the general store who had seen Jeremiah Eldridge and the enigmatic stranger meet. Only a few days after making his statement to Sheriff Layton, McCreary passed away on December 12, 1895. The attending physician's statement stated that the patient exhibited unusual symptoms, including auditory hallucinations and extreme agitation in the 24 hours preceding death, despite the fact that apoplexy was listed as the cause of death. In the spring of 1964, Thornton traveled to Newton County with these new findings. He found Echo Hollow and spent days recording the location, according to his correspondence. After failing to return to his rented room in Jasper 3 days later, Thornton was reported missing. In his final letter to his thesis advisor, dated June 12, 1964, he wrote, "I've found something that may explain everything. A narrow crevice in the eastern wall, hidden behind vegetation. It extends deep into the limestone. I've acquired climbing equipment and plan to explore it tomorrow." If my theory is correct, the Eldridges didn't leave Hollow Creek. They went deeper into it. At Echo Hollow, a search crew discovered his notes and camping gear, but they couldn't find Thornton. Although the crevice he described was found, it was judged to be too small for an adult human to pass through after a certain point. After a week, the hunt was called off. Thornton's theory, which was unfinished when he vanished, suggested that the Eldridge settlement was purposefully built close to Echo Hollow, rather than being haphazardly situated because Jeremiah knew something important about the area beforehand, possibly because of his connections or experiences during the Civil War. According to the thesis, the voices Rebecca and Martha mentioned in their journals and letters may have been something more real than their imaginations, possibly the voices of people who were already in the hollow, but whom the majority of the settlement's members were unaware of. It further conjectured that the excavation mentioned in the survey from 1872 might have been Jeremiah's own covert effort. Thornton's draft thesis has a particularly interesting section that links the Hollow Creek mystery to other historical events. The pattern of unusual acoustic properties, followed by reports of voices, followed by disappearances, is not unique to Echo Hollow. Similar accounts exist in historical records from at least 3 other locations across the Appalachian and Ozark regions, dating back to the early 19th century. In 1834, a surveying party in eastern Tennessee documented a perfect circular depression in limestone bedrock with remarkable acoustic properties. The lead surveyor reported hearing voices unlike any human speech when camping near the site. 3 members of the party subsequently vanished while conducting measurements of the depression. The official report attributed their disappearance to desertion. In 1851, a small mining operation in southern Kentucky was abandoned after workers reported hearing voices from the rock face. The mine owner documented unusual formations in the limestone that created unnatural acoustics. The operation ceased when 3 miners disappeared overnight, leaving their possessions and uncollected wages behind. Most relevant to the Hollow Creek incident is an 1863 Confederate military expedition to a location in eastern Tennessee that matches the description in Jeremiah Eldridge's fragmentary journal. Military records confirm that a special detachment led by Colonel Hargrove, including Corporal Eldridge, was dispatched to investigate an unspecified site of strategic interest. Of the 12 men who set out on this expedition, only 5 returned. Official records state they encountered Union forces, but personal correspondence from survivors mention something in the hollow, and voices that drove men to madness. How did James Thornton end up? Like the Lost Hollow clan before him, and Walter Eldridge before him, he just disappeared. Prior to being moved to microfilm in 1968 as part of an archive reorganization, his research materials were stored at the university. The microfilm vanished in 1969 and has never been found. Thus, the Lost Hollow clan's secret has not been resolved. In 1895, a whole community of 17 individuals disappeared from a remote area of the Ozark Valley. Over the years, many who have looked into their fate have encountered barriers, been silenced, or vanished themselves. Journal entries, letters, testimony, and survey notes are among the remnants that suggest something that defies simple explanation. Perhaps not otherworldly, but definitely beyond the realm of everyday experience. The limestone hollow, which shows signs of excavation and has flawless acoustics. The allusions to watchers and voices. Jeremiah Eldridge's peculiar actions following his run-in with an enigmatic stranger. Jacob Turner discovered damaged soil, but he never reported it. The actual Echo Hollow is still there, but it is now private property and closed to the public. The circular depression is depicted on satellite images exactly as it was in historical sources. The area where the settlement used to be has been reclaimed by the nearby forest. The location has never been the subject of an archaeological dig. What has been methodically omitted from the record? Dr. Winters, we are left with questions and the lack of conclusive evidence. Was there a perceived or actual threat that caused the Eldridge clan to flee? Were they victims of violence, their bodies so neatly concealed that no evidence was ever discovered? Or did they discover something in Echo Hollow, something that had existed long before them, something that Jeremiah might have known about all along, as James Thornton's incomplete thesis implied? Caves and underground passageways abound in the Ozark's limestone karst, some of which are miles below the surface, and many of which are yet uncharted. Could this underground world be connected to Echo Hollow? What might have lured the settlers into its depths on that October night in 1895? If it existed, we might never find out. The physical evidence has deteriorated with time. The witnesses are long dead, and the records are fragmented. Every investigation has come to an unresolved end, frequently with the investigator becoming entangled in the mystery. One last point is worth mentioning. A hiker in the region claimed to have discovered a child's shoe close to the location of Echo Hollow in 1977. The worn shoe, which could be identified as having been made in the late 19th century, was given to the local government. It probably belonged to a girl who was around 7 years old, which is the same age Martha Eldridge's daughter would have been in 1895, according to tests. When researchers asked to view the shoe in 1983, they were told that it had been mistakenly disposed of during a cleanup of the evidence room. The shoe had been kept as evidence. A geologist named Dr. Eleanor Blackwood, who surveyed Echo Hollow in 1992 as part of an unrelated karst survey, wrote in her report, "The depression shows a number of anomalous features that indicate it may not be entirely natural in origin. The perfect circularity is unusual for karst formations. Ground-penetrating radar shows unusual density patterns beneath the surface that do not match typical limestone compositions. Most importantly, sound measurements confirm the exceptional acoustic properties reported historically, including frequency amplification of certain low tones that fall just at the threshold of human hearing, which could potentially produce auditory phenomena that might be interpreted as voices under certain circumstances." Blackwood's report was filed with the U.S. Geological Survey, but was designated restricted access in 1994 for reasons not listed in public records. Robert Jenkins, a local historian, made an effort to gather all the facts about the Hollow Creek disappearance in 1998 for a book on Ozark mysteries. His work was never released. His widow claims that following a trip to Newton County in late 1998, Jenkins gave up on the project. She said he was noticeably frightened when he returned from the trip, burned his notes, and would not talk about what he had found. Jenkins passed away from a stroke in 2002, and when asked, he would only respond, "Some things should stay buried." Among his personal belongings were a small metal button from a Confederate uniform and a piece of limestone with strange markings that his widow described as not natural, like something had carved symbols into it. These items vanished from Jenkins's study before experts could examine them. Thus, the quiet surrounding Hollow Creek persists, only occasionally disturbed by the murmurs of people who recall the legend. The Ozarks are good at keeping secrets. Some claim that the ground still listens, and the limestone depression is still a perfect circle among the wooded hills where sounds travel in an odd way. Locals have a straightforward piece of advice for anyone who happens to be in the vicinity of Newton County, close to the abandoned trail that used to lead to Hollow Creek. Pay attention to the quiet, and don't respond if the silence responds. Don't look into it. Above all, avoid digging, because some people who disappear do not want to be discovered, and some mysteries are not meant to be solved.